We have to stop them, Caleb.
No.
No, I'm not gonna run.
I remember when my father planted this. It's too quiet now.
This is a formal violation notice.
You ever wake up and realize your neighbors just destroyed something your family spent 30 years building? Fresh sawdust drifted through the cold Tennessee air, and diesel smoke rolled off two contractor trucks parked near my dock. And standing right in the middle of it all was Patricia Whitmore, president of the Blackwater Shores HOA, holding a clipboard like she was inspecting a landscaping project at a country club instead of standing on private property. My name's Caleb Mercer. I'm 54 years old, living outside Kingston, Tennessee, and I run a 42-acre lake ranch my father left me when he passed. Most days it's quiet out here. Just me, a battered Ford F-250, a few fishing boats, and enough shoreline to forget the world exists for a while. Those cottonwoods weren't decoration. My dad planted them 32 years ago after a flood nearly tore half the bank into the lake. They blocked the wind, protected the shoreline, and gave us privacy from the giant HOA homes built across the water years later. Patricia knew that. Every person around that lake knew that. But Patricia Whitmore had this disease a lot of HOA presidents get after too many years with a clipboard and a title. She started believing the neighborhood belonged to her personally. She wore those crisp white blazers even in 80-degree weather, drove a pearl-colored Range Rover that somehow never had a speck of dirt on it, and talked to homeowners the way a principal talks to middle school kids caught chewing gum in class. The worst part? People let her get away with it because fighting with the HOA always turned into paperwork, fines, meetings, and stress nobody wanted. I'd ignored her for years. That was mistake number one. About 6 months earlier, Patricia started complaining during HOA meetings that my trees were blocking premium lake visibility. Premium lake visibility. That's the phrase she actually used. Like my ranch existed to improve the scenery for people drinking wine on second-story balconies across the water. Then came the letters. Official HOA notices taped to my gate saying the tree line was affecting neighborhood aesthetics. Problem was, I wasn't even in the HOA. Never had been. My ranch sat outside their jurisdiction by almost half a mile. Patricia knew that too. She just didn't care. And standing there that morning, watching contractors load branches into trailers while the smell of fresh cut would fill the air, she gave me this little smile and said, "The community deserves a better view of the lake, Caleb. And if you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA neighbor before, trust me, you're going to want to hear this one." Because Patricia Whitmore thought she'd just improved property values. What she actually did was hand me the perfect reason to legally block every single lake view in Blackwater Shores forever. Patricia must have expected me to explode. That is usually how these situations go around Blackwater Shores. Somebody gets angry, raises their voice, threatens lawsuits they never file, and eventually the HOA buries them under paperwork until they give up. But I did not yell. I did not threaten anybody. I just stood there in the cold morning air staring at the shoreline while the last chainsaw finally went silent. The smell of fresh sap hung over the lake, so thick you could taste it. One of the contractors actually avoided eye contact with me while loading branches into a trailer. That told me everything I needed to know. They knew this was wrong. Patricia walked over in those spotless white boots of hers like she was touring a winery instead of standing on private ranch land. "The board approved this unanimously," she said. "The residents have complained about blocked lake visibility for years." I looked at her clipboard. Not one county permit attached. No environmental authorization. No shoreline approval. Nothing. Just HOA letterhead and fake confidence. "You cut trees on land your HOA does not own," I told her. Patricia smiled the way people smile when they think money protects them from consequences. "You should really calm down before you make this difficult." That sentence right there changed everything for me. Because people like Patricia always assume calm means weak. They mistake silence for surrender. What she did not know was that my father spent 30 years teaching me one rule about land ownership in Tennessee. If somebody touches your property illegally, you document first and speak second. So I went back inside my ranch house, grabbed my old Nikon camera, a yellow legal pad, and started recording everything. Timestamps, vehicle plates, contractor company names, GPS markers along the shoreline, even the depth of the tire tracks pressed into the wet ground beside my dock. The county surveyor arrived around noon. Older guy named Wayne Haskins. Been mapping shoreline properties around Kingston Lake longer than Patricia had probably lived in Tennessee. Wayne stepped out of his truck, looked at the stumps, and let out a slow whistle. Well, he muttered, somebody just bought themselves a real expensive morning. Turns out those cottonwoods sat inside a protected shoreline buffer tied directly to my ranch deed dating back to 1989. Trees were not just decorative. They stabilized erosion along federally monitored water edges connected to the reservoir system, which meant removing them without county authorization was a very serious problem. Wayne walked the property for almost an hour while I followed behind taking notes. Patricia stayed across the shoreline on HOA property, talking nervously into her phone. For the first time all morning, she did not look confident anymore. Then things got even worse for her. Wayne found orange survey stakes half buried near the waterline. Temporary markers. HOA markers. Somebody had measured my land before cutting those trees, which meant this was not an accident. They knew exactly where the property line sat before they crossed it anyway. I remember Wayne pulling off his sunglasses and saying, "Caleb, if they knowingly ignored protected shoreline boundaries, the county is going to come down hard on this." Across the lake, I could already see curtains moving inside those giant HOA houses. Neighbors watching from kitchen windows. People always watch when power starts shifting. And for the first time since Patricia moved into Blackwater Shores 6 years earlier, the balance had started turning against her. If you noticed anything that could have been better in this story or video, feel free to leave your feedback. We would love to improve and make the next video even better. Because what Patricia Whitmore did next after realizing the county was involved nearly destroyed her entire HOA board in one afternoon. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the entire mood around Blackwater Shores had changed. You could feel it in the silence. Usually the HOA side of the lake stayed loud all day long. Jet skis whining across the water. Landscaping crews blowing leaves for hours. Somebody always playing country music from a pontoon boat, like the whole shoreline needed to hear their playlist. But after the county surveyor left my ranch, everything got quiet. Nervous quiet. The kind of quiet people get when they realize somebody important is about to start asking questions. I was standing beside the remains of the tree line with a tape measure and my legal pad when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "Mr. Mercer?" a woman asked. "This is Denise Holloway with Kingston County Environmental Compliance." That got my attention immediately. She explained that Wayne Haskins had already filed an incident report directly from the property. Fast. Faster than I expected. Apparently, once he confirmed protected shoreline vegetation had been removed without authorization, county protocol required immediate review. Denise asked me 3 questions. Did the HOA obtain written consent from me? No. Did they present any county permits before removing the trees? No. Had erosion control barriers been installed after cutting? I looked down at the muddy shoreline where loose dirt was already sliding toward the water every time small waves rolled in from passing boats. "Not even close," I said. There was a long pause on the line before she finally answered. "All right, Mr. Mercer. Please do not alter the site. We are sending inspectors tomorrow morning." Across the lake, I spotted Patricia Whitmore pacing along the HOA marina with her phone pressed against her ear. Even from that distance, I could tell she was rattled. Her perfect posture was gone. She kept turning in circles, waving one arm, while 2 board members stood nearby pretending not to panic. One of them was Douglas Reiner, vice president of the HOA. Retired orthodontist. Wore salmon-colored polo shirts like it was part of his personality. He had spent years backing Patricia on every ridiculous complaint she pushed through the board. Suddenly Douglas looked like a man realizing he picked the wrong side in a bar fight. About an hour later, a black SUV rolled slowly down my gravel driveway. Not county. Sheriff's Department. 2 deputies stepped out, both wearing neutral expressions that told me Patricia had already started trying to control the narrative. The older deputy introduced himself as Deputy Carl Mendez. Good guy. I had met him once at a fishing fundraiser years earlier. He glanced toward the shoreline before he even spoke. "We got a report that you threatened HOA contractors this morning," he said carefully. I almost laughed. "Carl, I have been writing notes on a legal pad for 6 hours." The younger deputy walked down toward the stumps while Carl stayed beside me. I handed him copies of the property survey, the deed records, and photos showing the contractors actively cutting trees past the marked property line. Carl read quietly for almost a full minute. Then he looked up toward Blackwater Shores across the lake. "They crossed onto protected shoreline property without county approval?" "Looks that way," I said. Carl let out a low breath through his nose and shook his head slowly. That is not good. Right then the younger deputy came walking back, holding one of the orange survey stakes Wayne had found earlier buried near the shoreline. These markers were placed before the cutting, he said. Carl stared at the stake for a second, then looked back at me. So they knew exactly where your property line was. I nodded once. Neither deputy said anything after that. They did not need to. Because the second those orange markers entered the conversation, this stopped looking like a landscaping misunderstanding and started looking intentional. And intentional mistakes around protected Tennessee shoreline land have a way of becoming very expensive very quickly. The next morning started with rain. Not a storm, just that cold, steady Tennessee drizzle that turns shoreline dirt into slick brown clay and makes everything smell like wet pine and lake water. I was already outside by 6 drinking coffee from an old thermos when the county trucks arrived. 3 of them. White doors, official seals, flashing amber lights reflecting off the water. Patricia Whitmore arrived less than 10 minutes later in her Range Rover, and the second she stepped out, I knew she had not slept. Her makeup was rushed, hair uneven. The confidence from yesterday morning was completely gone. Behind her came Douglas Reiner and another board member named Sheila Vance carrying folders so thick they looked like tax audits. Patricia marched straight toward the inspectors before they even unloaded equipment. This is being completely blown out of proportion, she announced loudly enough for everybody to hear. The HOA simply improved community visibility. One of the inspectors, a woman named Laura Bennett, did not even look up from her clipboard. Did your association obtain county authorization to remove protected shoreline vegetation? Patricia froze for half a second. Tiny pause. But enough. We believed authorization was unnecessary due to aesthetic maintenance authority under the HOA charter, she replied carefully. Laura finally looked up at her. Ma'am, your HOA charter does not override county environmental law. Silence. Just rain tapping against truck hoods and small waves rolling against my dock. Patricia tried again. Surely there is some misunderstanding here. Then Laura walked over to one of the stumps near the shoreline and pointed directly at the exposed ground beneath it. The dirt had already started sliding downhill into the lake overnight. This root system was stabilizing shoreline erosion, she said. Removing these trees without mitigation barriers may place sediment directly into protected reservoir waters. I watched Douglas slowly remove his glasses and rub both eyes. He suddenly looked about 15 years older than he had yesterday. The inspectors spent almost 4 hours photographing damage, measuring runoff areas, and documenting every stump along the shoreline. Meanwhile, Patricia kept trying to control the conversation. At one point, she pulled me aside near the dock and lowered her voice. Caleb, this does not need to become public. I almost admired the nerve. 24 hours earlier, she was smiling while my family trees hit the ground. Now she wanted privacy. You cut down 17 trees on my property, I told her. It became public the second your chainsaw started. Her expression hardened instantly. There was the real Patricia again. You are making a mistake, she said quietly. The HOA has resources, lawyers, influence. I nodded toward the inspectors planting temporary erosion flags across my shoreline. Looks like the county has resources too. That hit harder than she expected. Around noon, one of the inspectors walked over carrying a yellow citation packet. Official. The kind of paperwork nobody wants handed to them in front of witnesses. Laura asked Patricia to sign acknowledgement of receipt. Patricia actually stepped backward. You are citing the HOA? She asked. Laura answered without emotion. At minimum. Douglas nearly choked when he heard that phrase. At minimum. Because everybody standing there understood what it meant. The county still had not finished investigating. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of the inspectors uncovered fresh grading marks extending farther down the shoreline beyond the original tree line. Somebody had planned additional clearing. More trees. More land. Laura turned slowly toward Patricia. How extensive was the HOA planning to make this project? Patricia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. And right then, for the very first time since this started, I realized something important. Patricia Whitmore had never expected anyone to push back hard enough to uncover the full plan. Once the county inspectors discovered those extra grading marks beyond the original tree line, the entire atmosphere shifted again. Up until that moment, Patricia Whitmore could still pretend this had been some kind of overzealous landscaping decision. A misunderstanding. Bad judgment. But planned expansion? That was different. That meant intent. The rain finally stopped around mid-afternoon, leaving the shoreline heavy with the smell of wet dirt and fresh-cut wood. Mud clung to everybody's boots while inspectors walked farther down the bank, placing orange warning flags near areas where runoff had already started sliding toward the reservoir. Patricia stood off to the side, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles looked white. She kept making calls, pacing circles near the marina, but whatever confidence she usually carried around like perfume was completely gone now. Then one of the county inspectors uncovered something even worse buried under a pile of fresh branches near the shoreline. Rolled blueprints. Actual project drawings. I watched Laura Bennett kneel down in the mud, unroll the soaked papers across the hood of a county truck, and go completely silent for about 5 seconds. Douglas Reiner walked over first. The second he saw the plans, the color drained from his face. I stepped closer and immediately understood why. The HOA had not planned to stop at the trees. According to the drawings, Blackwater Shores intended to build a terraced lake overlook platform extending nearly 40 feet toward my property line. Decorative stone seating. Community fire pit. Observation deck. There was even a label that read Premium Sunset Viewing Area, built directly facing my ranch. Patricia noticed us looking and hurried over fast enough to nearly slip in the mud. Those are conceptual drafts, she snapped immediately. Nothing had been finalized. Laura looked up at her without blinking. Ma'am, these drafts include contractor measurements, material quantities, and excavation markings. Patricia opened her mouth and stopped. No answer, because there was not a good one. The platform would have crossed directly into protected shoreline territory tied to my ranch deed easement. Not only had they already cut trees illegally, they were preparing to build permanent structures near land they did not legally control. And suddenly, all those years of HOA intimidation stopped mattering. Nobody cared about mailbox violations anymore. This had crossed into county enforcement territory. One of the younger inspectors walked over carrying another clipboard and quietly informed Laura that satellite records showed recent excavation permit searches connected to Blackwater Shores HOA. Patricia interrupted immediately. We were only exploring options for community improvements. Laura finally lost a little patience. Community improvements do not authorize you to remove protected vegetation or expand onto neighboring shoreline property. Across the lake, more residents had gathered along balconies and docks watching everything unfold. Word spreads fast in wealthy lake communities. Faster when county trucks show up. I recognized a few homeowners who had always acted terrified of Patricia during HOA meetings. Funny thing was, they did not look scared anymore. They looked curious, interested, like people realizing the woman who controlled the neighborhood for 6 straight years might actually lose. As the inspectors packed up equipment near sunset, Laura handed Patricia a second citation packet, larger than the first one. Patricia stared at it like it physically hurt to hold. This investigation is now being escalated for formal county review, Laura said calmly. And until further notice, all HOA shoreline activity is suspended. Patricia's face went completely blank. No anger, no confidence, just pure disbelief. Because for the first time in her life, somebody with more authority than her had finally told her no. By the end of that week, Blackwater Shores looked like a neighborhood waiting for a hurricane to hit. Nobody said it out loud, but everybody felt it. The HOA board stopped posting cheerful updates online. The marina lights stayed off at night. Even the landscaping crews disappeared. Meanwhile, county trucks kept showing up at my ranch almost every morning. Soil inspectors, environmental compliance officers, survey teams carrying equipment cases through the mud while residents watched from across the lake like they were witnessing a crime documentary unfold in real time. Patricia Whitmore tried to regain control the only way she knew how. Threats. 3 days after the county suspended all shoreline activity, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorneys. Thick envelope. Expensive paper. The kind designed to intimidate people before they even read the first sentence. The letter accused me of interfering with lawful community development, damaging HOA reputation, and creating unnecessary public conflict. They demanded I stop communicating with county officials directly and threatened civil litigation if I continued obstructing neighborhood improvements. Attached by accident was an internal HOA email chain. Somebody at the law office must have included the wrong file when preparing the packet. And inside those emails was everything. Patricia discussing lake visibility complaints from wealthy homeowners. Patricia describing my ranch tree line as the final obstacle to increasing premium property values. Patricia instructing board members to move quickly before Mercer notices county setback details. I read that sentence 3 times. Before Mercer notices, meaning she knew exactly what she was doing from the start. There it was in writing. Intent, planning, awareness of legal boundaries. I leaned back in my chair staring at the lake through the kitchen window while that settled in. Then my phone rang. Deputy Carl Mendez again. You sitting down? He asked immediately. Turns out county investigators had started interviewing the contractors Patricia hired for the cutting project. One of them admitted under questioning that he specifically warned HOA representatives the trees appeared to sit beyond community property lines. Patricia approved the work anyway. Carl told me the contractor had documentation too. Signed authorization forms. Timestamps. Recorded communications. Caleb, Carl said carefully. This thing is turning into a real mess for them. Outside my kitchen window, I could see lights flickering on inside the HOA houses across the lake as evening settled over the water. Expensive homes. Massive glass windows facing directly toward my ranch shoreline. The same view Patricia had been obsessed with improving. That was when an idea started forming in my head. Slow at first. Quiet. But the more I looked across that water, the more perfect it became. Because everybody assumed my revenge would be a lawsuit. Or fines. Or county penalties. But my father taught me something else about land ownership years ago while we rebuilt fence lines after a storm. The strongest revenge is permanent. The next morning I drove into Kingston and met with a property development attorney named Rachel Dunham. Smart woman. Sharp eyes. Patience for nonsense. I spread the ranch maps, county citations, and shoreline surveys across her conference table while she read silently for almost 20 minutes. Finally, she looked up and asked one question. How attached are you to your current shoreline view? I smiled for the first time all week. Not very. Rachel turned one of the surveys toward me and tapped a section near the old tree line. Because under Tennessee property law and your existing easement rights, she said calmly, you could legally build something here that would completely block Blackwater shores from seeing this lake ever again. Rachel Dunham spent the next hour walking me through Tennessee shoreline development law, like a professor explaining chess moves to somebody who had only ever played checkers. Every sentence out of her mouth made Patricia Whitmore's situation worse. The ranch easement tied to my property was older than the entire Blackwater Shores development itself. Long before those million-dollar lake houses existed, my family owned that stretch of shoreline outright. The county protected the erosion buffer, but the land itself was still mine to legally improve within approved zoning limits. According to Rachel, one type of improvement stood out above all the others. Privacy structures. You lost your natural tree barrier, she explained while tapping the survey map with a pen. Tennessee law allows you to restore shoreline privacy using approved permanent structures and vegetation. Then she looked up at me with the smallest grin. There is no legal requirement that your neighbors keep their scenic lake view. That sentence stayed in my head the entire drive home. There is no legal requirement that your neighbors keep their scenic lake view. Across the water, the houses of Blackwater Shores glowed gold under the evening sunset. Massive windows, multi-level decks, outdoor fireplaces. Every single home angled toward the exact shoreline Patricia had just destroyed trying to improve property values. She never realized those trees had been protecting her view too. The next 2 weeks became a blur of paperwork, permits, and planning meetings. Rachel moved fast. Faster than the HOA attorneys expected. We filed shoreline restoration applications with the county, environmental stabilization requests, and architectural plans for a fully compliant lakeside privacy installation. 48-foot native stone retaining walls. Elevated storage structures. Fast-growing evergreen barriers approved for erosion control. Everything completely legal. Completely permanent. And best of all, every inch of it sat entirely within my property rights. The county approved the first phase almost immediately because technically I was restoring damage caused by illegal vegetation removal. Patricia nearly lost her mind when she found out. She came storming onto the public access road outside my ranch one afternoon while survey crews placed marker flags near the shoreline. You are retaliating against the community, she shouted while wind whipped her hair across her face. I stayed calm. That drove her crazier than yelling ever could. I am restoring my property, I replied. Legally. Patricia pointed toward the lake with both hands. You cannot wall off an entire neighborhood. I looked directly at the empty shoreline where my father's cottonwoods used to stand. Funny, I said. Nobody seemed worried about property rights when the chainsaw showed up. She had no answer for that. Around us, the survey crew kept working in silence, pounding bright orange stakes into the mud every 20 feet, each one marking where the future privacy barrier would rise. Residents across the lake started noticing too. I watched people gathering on balconies with binoculars and coffee mugs trying to figure out what the flags meant. Rumors spread fast. Some homeowners blamed Patricia immediately. Others insisted the county would stop me. But every call they made only confirmed the same thing. Permits were valid. The project was legal. And there was absolutely nothing the HOA could do about it. Then came the county hearing. That was the day Patricia Whitmore truly lost control. The hearing room smelled like old carpet, printer ink, and burnt coffee from a machine probably older than half the county staff. Patricia arrived with 2 attorneys, Douglas Reiner, and a stack of binders thick enough to stop a door. I walked in with Rachel and 1 folder. 1. Because unlike Patricia, we did not need to bury the truth under paperwork. County commissioners reviewed the environmental violations first. Illegal shoreline clearing, unauthorized vegetation removal, planned encroachment beyond setback lines. Patricia sat rigid in her chair while photographs of the destroyed tree line appeared on a projector screen larger than her living room wall. Then one commissioner asked the question nobody in Blackwater Shores wanted answered. Mrs. Whitmore, he said calmly, did your association knowingly proceed with this project after being warned about the property boundaries? The room went so quiet I could hear the projector fan humming overhead. Patricia Whitmore tried to answer the commissioner's question 3 different times, and somehow every attempt made things worse. First, she claimed the HOA believed the shoreline area fell under Community Beautification Authority. Then she blamed a contractor misunderstanding. Then she tried saying the property boundaries were unclear despite the survey stakes and internal emails already entered into county records. Watching her unravel in that hearing room felt surreal. This was the same woman who spent 6 years terrifying homeowners over mailbox colors and lawn edging. Now she could barely hold on to a sentence without one of the commissioners interrupting her with another piece of evidence. Rachel sat beside me calm as stone the entire time. Every now and then she would slide another document forward across the table. Survey maps, county records, photographs of the orange stakes, copies of Patricia's own emails discussing the project before construction began. Each page tightened the noose a little more around the HOA board. Then Commissioner Harold Benton leaned back in his chair and asked a question nobody in that room expected. Did the Blackwater Shores Homeowners Association carry liability coverage for unauthorized shoreline modification? The silence afterward was incredible. Patricia slowly turned toward one of her attorneys. The attorney avoided eye contact completely. Douglas Reiner looked like he might actually faint, because everybody suddenly realized the same thing at once. The HOA insurance policy probably would not cover intentional violations, which meant the financial fallout could land directly on the board members personally. I watched Patricia's entire posture change in real time. Her shoulders tightened. Her breathing got shallow. She stopped acting like HOA president and started looking like somebody calculating how much money they were about to lose. The county commissioners recessed for 20 minutes while legal staff reviewed the environmental findings. During that break, homeowners from Blackwater Shores started whispering loudly enough that half the hallway could hear them. Some were furious about the destroyed lake view situation. Others were furious because property values were already dropping from the county investigation rumors spreading online. One resident actually cornered Douglas near the vending machines, demanding to know why the HOA had touched private property in the first place. Douglas kept repeating, Patricia handled shoreline matters. Not we. Patricia. That little change in wording told me everything. The board was already preparing to sacrifice her to save themselves. When the hearing resumed, the commissioners issued their ruling. Immediate fines against the HOA for unauthorized shoreline clearing. Mandatory environmental restoration oversight. Suspension of all shoreline development applications tied to Blackwater Shores pending further review. And finally, formal referral to county legal authorities for investigation into potential knowing property violations. Patricia looked physically sick by the end of it. But then came the moment that truly broke her. Commissioner Benton reviewed my approved restoration permits and asked if I intended to proceed with the privacy redevelopment project along my shoreline. Rachel answered before I could. Yes, sir. Immediately. Benton nodded once. The county finds the proposed restoration structures fully compliant under existing shoreline and property statutes. Across the room, Patricia snapped upright, so fast her chair squealed against the floor. Cannot seriously approve that project after all this, she burst out. Benton removed his glasses slowly and looked directly at her. Mrs. Whitmore, your association illegally removed this man's natural privacy barrier. The county will not deny him lawful restoration rights simply because your residents dislike the consequences. Nobody spoke after that. They did not need to. The hearing ended 10 minutes later, but the damage was already done. Outside the courthouse, reporters from a small Knoxville local news station were waiting near the entrance because apparently somebody had leaked details about the environmental investigation. Cameras turned toward Patricia the second she stepped outside. She immediately tried shielding her face while hurrying toward her Range Rover. One reporter shouted, "Mrs. Whitmore, is it true the HOA knowingly cut trees on protected private property?" Another asked whether homeowners would face special assessments to cover legal penalties. Patricia never answered. She just climbed into the SUV and slammed the door hard enough for everybody in the parking lot to hear it. Meanwhile, Rachel stood beside me watching the entire scene unfold with the faintest smile imaginable. You realize, she said quietly, once construction starts, those lake views are gone forever. I looked out across the distant water shimmering under the late afternoon sun and thought about my father's trees. Construction started exactly 19 days after the county hearing, and the first sound that echoed across Kingston Lake that morning was not chainsaws. It was concrete trucks. Deep diesel engines rolling slowly down my gravel road before sunrise, while mist floated over the water like smoke. By 7 o'clock, crews were already unloading massive native stone blocks along the shoreline where my father's cottonwoods used to stand. The smell of wet cement and fresh earth filled the air while excavators carefully shaped the new retaining foundations under county supervision. Every single step had inspectors present. Every permit approved. Every measurement documented. Completely legal. Completely permanent. Across the lake, the reaction inside Blackwater Shores was immediate. Homeowners stood frozen on their balconies clutching coffee mugs while the first stone walls started rising along my shoreline. Some people watched silently. Others argued openly on their docks. I even heard one woman yelling from across the water. Patricia told us this would never happen. That was the part that really drove her crazy. Rachel designed everything carefully. Natural Tennessee fieldstone. Cedar privacy structures. Rows of fast-growing evergreens planted behind reinforced shoreline barriers. What used to be an open scenic view from Blackwater Shores was slowly transforming into a private lakeside fortress. And there was absolutely nothing the HOA could do to stop it. The county even approved additional erosion stabilization planting after inspectors confirmed the original tree removal had damaged shoreline integrity, which meant the privacy barrier eventually became larger than my father's old tree line ever was. By the second month, the view from Blackwater Shores was almost completely gone. Residents who paid premium prices for unobstructed lake scenery now looked directly at a beautifully landscaped wall of stone, cedar, and evergreen privacy screening. Property value rumors spread immediately. Some homeowners blamed Patricia openly during HOA meetings. Others demanded her resignation. Douglas Reiner resigned first. Sheila Vance followed 2 weeks later. Then came the final blow. County legal investigators confirmed Patricia knowingly authorized the tree removal after contractors warned her about the property boundaries. The HOA insurance company denied coverage almost overnight once intentional misconduct entered the investigation. Suddenly, Blackwater Shores faced massive legal exposure, environmental restoration costs, and potential special assessments charged directly to homeowners. Patricia Whitmore resigned 3 days later. No goodbye speech. No final HOA announcement. Just a short email sent at 11:48 at night, saying she was stepping down for personal reasons. I respected property rights. She thought power meant ownership, and that mistake cost her everything. The lake eventually grew quiet again after summer ended. The county closed the investigation months later after the HOA paid enormous penalties and completed mandatory environmental restoration monitoring. But the privacy wall stayed exactly where it was. Permanent. Every sunset across Kingston Lake now disappears behind those towering evergreens and stone barriers Patricia accidentally gave me the legal right to build. Total reason for failure. Patricia Whitmore believed HOA authority was stronger than private property law and ignored clear legal boundaries out of arrogance and greed. Total reason for victory. I stayed calm, documented everything, followed county law, and used legal property rights instead of emotion. Lesson for viewers. Never underestimate the value of documentation, patience, and knowing your legal rights when somebody oversteps onto your property. Sometimes the strongest revenge is simply letting the law finish the job for you. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from, and tell me whether you would have handled this situation differently.
I feel like everything we built, everything we hoped for, is gone. Check the HOA bylaws on tree removal. Verify the date of that violation notice.